Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program will begin momentarily. Please welcome the Atlantic's Margaret Lowe.
We are so happy to be here in Houston with all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the freezing cold weather, which made all of us Northerners feel right at home here in Houston. And thank you so much for being here at the Renewal Summit. Welcome. What a wonderful, wonderful crowd it is here this morning. We've been crisscrossing the country with this Renewal series, exploring the surge of local problem solving. So many cities, large and small, are labs of innovation and labs of inspiration. We've been to Phoenix, we've been to Pittsburgh, we've been to Seattle, and now here we are with you in Houston. So why, you may ask, did we choose to come to Houston? First, it is the perfect place to explore the whole idea of renewal, what it really means, and also to consider some of the really vexing issues that so many cities across our country faces. In addition, this is the biggest city in the state. The population is skyrocketing. After Dallas, more people are moving to Houston than any other city in the country. I suspect this is not a news bulletin to anybody in this room, but certainly relevant to why we're here. The city is also exquisitely diverse, the most racially and ethnically diverse major metropolitan area in the country. Your neighbors have come from across the country and around the world and speak 145 languages: Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, Urdu, Tamil, and Tagalog, to name just a few. And your economy is thriving again, thanks to oil and gas, medical services, and tech. More than 20 Fortune 500 companies call Houston home. And beyond that, you have a bustling port. But I think, as everybody here also knows, like so many cities across the country, there are enormous disparities. Not all Houstonians are benefiting from this bustling economy. And as you also know too well, Hurricane Harvey created enduring challenges for this city. So the question we'll ask today is, what fuels renewal and innovation here? What are the hurdles? And importantly, how can this city produce more opportunity for more people? We'll explore those essential questions over the course of the morning, but I do, before we dive in, want to give a big shout out. I want to thank Allstate for making our Renewal series and today's gathering possible. We are so grateful for your support. Thank you. I have a few much less lofty notes. Please silence your cell phones, but don't put them away. We'd love you to join the conversation on Twitter at AtlanticLIVE. Use the hashtag Renewal Series, and that's just one word. And we want you to be part of the conversation in the room, too. We're going to have time for your questions throughout the morning, and we would really love you to feel inspired to participate in this conversation. With that, let's roll. Our first guest is Wes Moore, the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, an organization that fights poverty. Wes Moore is also a Rhodes Scholar, an author, and a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. Welcome, Wes Moore. He's here with my colleague, Atlantic Senior Editor Ron Brownstein. Ron? The floor is yours. Take it away.
You know, Wes, I have no concerns about you, but I am a little worried someone's going to check my credentials and discover I am not nearly cool enough to be in this space. So I'm hoping to get at least a little, you know, kind of ancillary. So, you know, you're based in New York City, but you have examined these issues in cities around the country. And one thing, as we see just with the Amazon announcement this week, cities are thriving again. Many big cities are adding jobs. They're adding population after years of decline. They're once again establishing themselves as centers of innovation and dynamism in the economy. But the question that Margaret alluded to what extent is all of that growth benefiting people in the kind of neighborhoods you work in around the country?
Yeah, and first, thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you, Ron. It's been a real joy. Thank you all for having me. It's good being in Houston, even though I thought it'd be a little warmer, but that's all right. But I'm really excited that you guys are leading on this conversation because, you know, the truth is that there are a lot of exciting things happening. We're watching growth within cities. We're watching, you know, employment mechanisms within cities, which have been really exciting, but it's also really powerful to have this conversation in a place like Houston, where, you know, you've watched all the things that Margaret alluded to in Houston, which are all real. But we also know that the poverty rate in Houston has actually gone up during that time. You know, Houston's actually similar to New York in some ways as well, where when you understand this fluidity of poverty and the complications of the fluidity of poverty, about how Houston, because it is such a welcoming city, because it is such a place that invites people, you know, and particularly even people who might be falling on harder times. You know, you look at the fact that Houston was one of the leading recipients of people who, after Hurricane Katrina, were looking and coming to Houston, right? Similar to New York after what happened in Puerto Rico, with the exception of Miami. New York received more people who were fleeing Puerto Rico after the hurricane than any other place after Hurricane Maria. But we also understand that at this time of booming growth, the fact that we have so many people who still repeatedly find themselves underwater. And when we're talking about the poverty rates, you know, within our cities, we're talking about the national poverty rate of $24,500 for a family of 4, right? And so even when we're talking about not just the growing poverty rate that we have within Houston, even the people who are right on the cusp, the millions more who are one shock away, the millions more who an unexpected bill, a hike in transportation costs, a child getting sick, little things like that that can immediately force a family back down. So the fact that we're having this conversation about growth is good, but what does it mean to make sure that this is inclusive growth, sustainable growth, inclusive growth? That has to matter and has to be at the forefront of the conversation.
Well, let me ask you about that, because you know, John Hickenlooper, when he was now the governor of Colorado, when he was the mayor of Denver, he used to talk about what he called the Denver paradox, and it fits very much in with what Margaret was saying about Houston. He used to say, Denver, the economy is so good, the quality of life is so good, we are attracting talented people from all over the country and all over the world. And indeed, we see Houston is in exactly the same position. But the paradox was they could not put their own kids from low-income and minority neighborhoods on track to compete for the jobs they are creating. What does it take? I mean, it's pretty clear that does not happen by itself. The growth alone in a city does not create the bridge from neighborhoods that are left behind and those. What does it take? what have you seen that allows for more of that? Is there any place that's figured it out?
You know, so it's interesting. So there are places that have figured out, but it does take that level of deliberate thought and also the level of making some bets on some things that you know that you can have partnerships in a way to examine how this is actually going to work. So for example, you know, I take a look at a city like Baltimore, where if you look at 15 years ago, the largest employer in Baltimore City was Bethlehem Steel. And basically, if you had a high school degree and a strong back, you had a job. Now the largest employer in Baltimore City is Johns Hopkins University. Try getting a job at Johns Hopkins with a high school degree and a strong back, right? And so the requirements of what is necessary and what is useful and what is purposeful have also continued to evolve. One thing that's happened where you find different areas that are looking for how do we adapt our educational system to be able to prepare for jobs for the future. You know, it's interesting, you mentioned Amazon earlier. And oftentimes people talk about, well, what were the incentives that these different jurisdictions offered to Amazon, and all those are really important questions. But the other really important question also has to be this: what were the things that Amazon needed to see in order for a city to be selected? Right? What were the things that needed to be in place for and again, if in 2018 it's Amazon, in 2019 it'll be somebody else, in 2020 it'll be somebody else. But when we're talking about things like a mass transit system that actually works to move people from homes to jobs and actually works not to separate communities, but a mass transit system that actually works to bring cities together. An education system that is actually preparing students for further employment opportunities and for further opportunities within that can actually make sure that these opportunities can stay within the localized jurisdictions. A high school system that's preparing students for either college or careers. So you're looking at all these things about how you find certain cities that have actually shown interesting models in order to, and are being rewarded for them, because you're watching economies that are growing, you're watching businesses that are moving in, and you also see the other side of the coin.
So let's talk about that other side, because this is your work at Robinhood. And as we have gone around the country on this project in the last few years, we have seen lots of examples of innovation at the grassroots level, sometimes from local governments that are expanding pre-K, for example, sometimes nonprofits, sometimes alliances with local business, often working in combination. As you assess this problem, as you approach this problem, what are, in your minds, the delineated roles for national government, local government, nonprofits, the business community? What are the pieces that each have to contribute to making a dent?
So I think that's actually one of the things that I've been most excited about is seeing how these different groups now are working together to be able to get this stuff done, where we all have a distinct and significant role to play. So, for example, I think about the work of Robinhood. Robinhood is one of the largest individual poverty-fighting organizations in America. Every year, Robinhood will, give out well over $100 million into the poverty fight. And the truth is that I could walk to our team or walk into the office and say, you know what, guys, big idea this year. Let's put $25 million into education. And people would say, that's amazing. That's a huge, or $50 million, $75 million. Throw the number out. And they're like, that's extraordinary. And the truth is that if you look at the budget for the Department of Education in New York City alone, the budget for the Department of Education in New York City is $25 billion. So I could make a huge announcement saying $50 million, $75 million in education, and we still know that it would be a fraction of what DOE is going to put in. The reason I say that, though, is this. And so the question then becomes, how then do we compound our capital usefully? How do we take bets and make punts and be able to essentially de-risk the investments that we know can work and then be able to present them to the larger partners who then can say, we can take this over because essentially it's now de-risked. So for example, you look at the issue of legal representation for people who are undocumented. In the United States, everyone has the legal right to legal representation unless you're undocumented. And so oftentimes what we would have then is 2-year-olds in immigration court defending themselves. So Robinhood basically came in and said, you know what, we think there's a way we can actually do this. So we created this thing called the Immigrant Justice Corps. The Immigrant Justice Corps is essentially providing legal representation and providing lawyers to people, children, et cetera, families who are undocumented, to allow them legal representation as they go through the process of defending themselves. The city of New York saw that, saw the success around it, and is now basically taking it on because they said we can do this.
With that example, so do you see the role of the nonprofits to fill niches that public policy doesn't fill, or to take risks that governments can't take initially themselves? Prove concepts.
Yeah, so I mean, my opinion on that is that philanthropies oftentimes don't have the size to be the safety net. But we can be the springboard. We can be the ones that can go and make the bets, make the punts. Think about the different policies that are in place that actually can be challenged and the policies in place that actually can be changed. You know, you take another example, you look at housing court. If a person is living in subpar housing and a person then is then taken to housing court or tries to take their landlord to housing court, 90% of tenants who have to go to housing court will not have legal representation. 90% of landlords will. So landlords are basically using legal representation and using lawyers to defend their case while their tenants do not have that. And so we actually funded and invested in this platform called Just Fixed. Just Fixed is a technology. It's a basic algorithmic technology that allows tenants to basically gather information, bind together, and then be able to make their legal arguments against their landlords with a greater sense of strength and a greater sense of cohesion. This platform a simple platform called Just Fixed, now is something that has continued to grow and scale and to go into multiple different cities. But so we found that our way of leveraging and our way of using our resources was use the resources to create not just a platform that works, but to expose a system that doesn't. And then be able to use those two things that are married to then be able to create a larger systemic change that was necessary in order for real to happen.
As you noted, though, on many issues, ultimately you need public investment to get the scale to really have a dent. And public investment at both the national and the state level in young people is kind of moving in the opposite direction. As a share of GDP, federal spending on kids has been going down. Most states have only recently reached the level of K-12 spending per capita they had before the recession. And one that really jumps out to me is that in 2017, for the first time ever, public universities and colleges around the country got more of their revenue from tuition, which is basically parents and kids, than they did from state dollars. Now, all of this is happening as we are living through some pretty profound demographic milestones. Sometime before 2020, right around 2020, a majority of our under-18 population will be non-white for the first time in American history. Certainly here in Texas, 2/3 of the under-30 population are already young people of color. Are these two things coincidental or related? More diversity and less investment?
Well, and that's the thing. If you look at so many of these areas, Ron, these are areas that have been chronically underinvested in. You know, so this isn't, we're not even watching a new phenomenon. We're actually watching a continuation of policies that have been, you know, structurally broken in the ways that we are dealing with the most vulnerable and the most disadvantaged and the most chronically put behind. You know, and part of it is, and I have a colleague at Robinhood who says, you know, oftentimes these conversation is a conversation of us versus them. Us versus them, us versus them. And the truth is, there's just an us.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. I mean, you know, one of the central realities, demographic realities of 21st century America, is that an increasingly non-white workforce will be funding the retirement of a vastly expanding, mostly white pool of seniors. And we're adding 40 million more seniors. 80% of our seniors are white. And all of the future growth in the workforce projected over the next 20 years is non-white. But it has been very hard to politically convince that older generation that they have a stake in helping more of that younger, diverse generation get into the middle class. Are there any secrets to making that happen?
Yeah, so I think one of the big secrets is that we also have to do a better job of changing the narrative as to why people should care. Why does this matter to people? Because oftentimes when people are you know, will make an argument that it's like, well, it's either you're going to pay for this or you'll pay for a criminal justice system. You'll pay for this or you're going to pay for a, you know, social safety net, social welfare system. Fair. And the numbers actually show that actually is true. But it's also making the argument from a deficit perspective. We have to make the argument from an asset perspective. What are you missing out on if we're not having proper investments in the newest people to this country? To the children who are coming up in families that maybe they don't have the same level of lineage, but have an extraordinary amount of promise. So part of the narrative has to be, how are we thinking about this, not necessarily from saying we are doing this because we feel sorry for, but we're doing this because we should care. This is not a measure of sympathy.
It's mutual interest.
It's a complete mutual. If you're saying, if you're not doing this to be selfless, do it to be selfish. Because if you really want to be in a community that is safe and prosperous and thriving, make sure everybody in that community feels like it is safe and prosperous and thriving.
And your Medicare and Social Security is funded along the way.
That's
so
exactly
let me ask you
right.
this. Your personal story is very relevant to this discussion, and you have turned it into literature of a very high order with your book, The Other Westmore, about your life and the life of another young African-American man in the same neighborhood that you grew up with. Tell us a little bit about that story and what you have learned and taken away from your relationship with the other Westmore.
So it's just basically right after I had just received the Rhodes Scholarship, the Baltimore Sun, which is my hometown paper, wrote this article about how I was a local kid who just received this scholarship, and I was going overseas to go study with these 31 other American students. And at the same time, we're talking about my life and my childhood, and how I had quite a few issues coming up. I grew up in a single-parent household. I first got involved in the justice system, or got involved with the justice system, when I was 11 years old. I was asked to leave my first school by the time I was 10. And it talked about the series of interventions, second chances, et cetera, that kind of led to me now receiving this scholarship. And at the same time, they're writing a whole series of articles about 4 guys who one day walked into a jewelry store. And in the process of robbing this jewelry store in this botched robbery, they ended up killing an off-duty police officer. And this off-duty police officer was a 13-year veteran of the Baltimore police force. He was a 3-time recipient of Police Officer of the Year. He was also a father of 5 who just had triplets. And he was working this second job as a security guard to make extra money for his family. And after a 12-day national manhunt, all 4 guys were caught. And one of the people that the police caught was also named Westmore. And I found out that we were from the same area. We both grew up in single-parent households, both were involved in the justice system, et cetera. And as I was getting ready to head off to England on this scholarship, he was getting ready to spend the rest of his life in Jessup Correctional Institution, and where he is still to this day. He's now in year 17 of his life sentence. And the thing that I really wanted to explore was how thin that line is between our life and someone else's life. The thing that I really wanted to explore was how quickly as a society we can either congratulate or castigate without being willing to delve into the understanding and asking the question of why. And how quick we are to have this conversation about the others. And hence the name of the book, The Other Westmore, without being able to delve into what it means for those who are consistently growing up as the others. And that as we're thinking about this larger growth and this larger hope and this larger promise of this country, that the larger hope and the larger promise of this country is that this country has a place for everybody. And that this country relies on all of our collective successes. And so this idea of coming up with growth, this idea of believing in inclusion, this idea of understanding that that while not everybody starts from the same place, that we all at least have the opportunity to move, that has to be something that's real. And really what I wanted to do with these stories and what I wanted to do with this book was to be able to take the reader on a journey where the reader knows the conclusion by simply looking at the back flap of the book. But let's go on this journey of these 2 kids and then end up understanding, A, what causes these splits, but then also understanding the things that we collectively can and should be thinking about and doing when it comes to making sure that opportunities are real.
Let's see if we can get one question from the audience here. Do we have a question? Do we have microphones? No? Okay. Oh, we do. Yes, we have one.
My name is Hadia Malawi. I'm the Community Initiatives Manager at Houston Grand Opera. And thank you, Wes, for your really impactful story.
Thank you.
I just wanted to know to what extent you think that even though you came from a single mother household and so did the other Wes, you feel that maybe the nature of the upbringing, the quality of attention, the nurturing that you got from your mother may have been that thin line between your paths?
Great question. Bless you, Heidi. Thank you so much. And, you know, I say and I believe deeply that, you know, the greatest gift that God gave me was one that I didn't ask for. And that was the day that he asked Joy Moore to give birth to me. Right? I mean, he blessed me without me even realizing how important a blessing that was. But I also know that when I think about myself and Wes, this was not the story of a good mom versus a bad mom. It was not the story of one kid gets in a way and the other kid did not. I think what ended up fundamentally happening was we have to redefine family in our society. That family is not just the person who is of blood or of kin. Family is the person who you will do anything to protect and align and create opportunities for. You know, because I think about it in my own life. You know, the truth is that there are people who are of no blood relation to me whatsoever who I would ride for. There's nothing I wouldn't do for them. And there are people, frankly, who are blood family, who I might walk by on the street, right? I think that I was blessed by the mom I had. And she'll be the first one to say, if she was sitting right here, it was not a perfect experience by any stretch of the imagination. You know, she was a very young widow who, and she'll be the first one to tell you, made a lot of mistakes and was going through a lot. But at the same time, I think people found the collective vision and the collective involvement to make sure that they were supporting her, supporting me, supporting my sisters, and changing the definition of family. Because I think that's actually how we then have to get to that point. And understanding when you were talking about single moms, you know, they're not our nation's burden. They've been our nation's backbone for a very long time.
Wes, before we go, if people want to learn more about what Robinhood does and what you do, where would they find it? Yeah,
so for Robinhood and for myself, you go to Robinhood, Robinhood.org is our site, and then also on social media, it's just, you know, I am Wes Moore. On all the different social media platforms, just, you know, at I am Wes Moore or at Robinhood NYC. And the truth is that, you know, we're New York based, but the truth is we're working on an issue and fighting for an issue that is not a New York issue alone. We believe deeply in the idea of partnership. We believe deeply in the idea of best practices, and we believe deeply on getting this right.
Well, you have given us a great framework for the day. Join me in thanking Wes Moore.
Thank you, guys.
Next up, please welcome Gloria Moreno, Assistant Director and Female Liaison for the City of Houston, Angela Blanchard, President Emerita of Baker Ripley, and Anise Parker, President and CEO of the Victory Fund and Institute and former Mayor of Houston. Here to lead the conversation is journalist Kathleen Koch.
Good morning, ladies. I'm really excited about this discussion because I've got a little hurricane experience myself. I grew up in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. And let me tell you, when it was devastated by Hurricane Katrina, we saw that disaster is really the great equalizer, you know, destroying the homes of the rich, the poor. Everyone pretty much lost everything at once. But the recovery tends to be less equal. What are you seeing here in Houston is the entire city moving forward together. And Gloria, I'd kind of like to really direct this to you. You're on the mayor's recovery team.
So the city is moving forward. I think partnering with the neighboring counties, we've made some strong headway to ensure that we have mitigation solutions long-term to make sure that we don't have the same kind of tragedy happen in the next disaster. For many of y'all who know, we've had 5 disasters in 3 years. So as a result, so many people have been impacted, and more importantly, there's so many unmet needs that have not been identified within the city of Houston. So the city of Houston is really trying to ensure that we capture the unmet needs so that we can ensure, one, the city receives its funding that it needs, whether it be from HUD, whether it be from FEMA, and then whether it be from the state of Texas through TDM. So unmet needs is something that's critical, but with work with the Harris County, we are totally working together to ensure that all the necessary dollars are coming to Houston and the Harris County area.
Either of you ladies have any thoughts on that? How we're doing?
There's always folks who fall below the radar. And I'm going to take a little exception to one of the things you said. A storm is a great equalizer, but there is undercurrent here in this city from the fact that many of the homes were actually flooded by the government and the Army Corps of Engineers and the San Jacinto River Authority. So you have that aspect of a lack of trust.
Man-made disaster, right, creates that, absolutely. You know, another thing that we saw after a major disaster is that elected officials, whether past or present, have these woulda, coulda, shoulda moments of introspection, you know, where they go, gosh, when I was in office, did I do enough to keep the people of my city safe? Did we spend enough on mitigation? Did we stop enough development? Did you have, Anise, any of those moments of introspection yourself during Harvey?
Well, during Harvey, I was out of office, and I will say that that's the time I missed being in office the most. I wanted to do something. And fortunately, I had the opportunity, thanks to Angela, to work at the NRG Center on the evacuation shelter, and for 3 weeks, I was spending 18 hours a day as the sort of the daytime manager at that shelter, and I was doing something. But the overlapping jurisdictions, if I had it to do over again, I played small ball. I was like, what could I do in the city of Houston with the tools in my hands? And I focused on the city development codes, small things. There really wasn't anybody, and in my view, it was a failure on the part of the state of Texas, and particularly probably the land commissioner, maybe the governor, to put people in a room together across multiple jurisdictions and make us play nicely. And what ended up happening, many of us were doing things, but we were doing it in our own lanes.
So there were communities, counties working together, all saying, we've got to focus on this and do something.
We were talking to each other, but we weren't really working together. We were working in parallel. A lot of big national issues that happens. Great organizations doing good work, but they never converge on the problem. They continue to operate in parallel.
Angela, Anise just mentioned a shelter. We've got a picture of one of the shelters in the city up. I know you did something so remarkable, being able to help stand up a shelter for 10,000 people in less than 24 hours. I'm thrilled to hear about just how you did that. But I'd also love to know more about what Baker Ripley is doing today in the recovery. I mean, the numbers I have here, you've helped 21,000 households. You've distributed $11.1 million. And in a quote in the media recently, you said, we have people out there that are still coming in because they cannot make their way through the convoluted bureaucracies.
So where to begin? So one of the things that was extraordinary about Harvey, and it's an opportunity to say thank you to the people in the room, is the longest lines and the most unmanageable part of operating the shelter was that so many of you showed up to help. And that was the entrance that actually proved a challenge. And it's this outpouring of generosity, this desire people have to be in solidarity with their neighbors when they're affected by a disaster that we took great advantage of. And that allowed us in a few hours to stand up a shelter with the generous volunteers in Houston. Our typical role at Baker Ripley, and my long-term specialty is in the long-term recovery. It's in the journey of when everything's wiped away, how do we start again as individuals and in a community? And more importantly, is what must cities do in a time when we see increasing displacement? So there are over 68 million people worldwide forcibly displaced by disaster, war or weather, not living in their own homes. And they come to cities. And we experienced it in Katrina, when you have over 100,000 people show up for dinner and you didn't plan for it. And so all cities must have this capacity to harness that generosity, not only in the immediate aftermath, to spread it across the real recovery period, which looks more like 3 to 5 years. So in the long-term recovery process, there are several stages, but one of the critical ones where people really need help is right at about a year, you come to a fork in the road. It's like on one hand, one fork says, this is my lot now, it's resignation. It looks, if you walk into the home, like it's been gutted and nothing else has been done, and they're not moving forward because it's become overwhelming and exhausting. And for seniors, often terrifying, their fear of losing their home. It's stalled. Or the other path is you've had some help, you've navigated the bureaucracies of insurance and FEMA and aid, and now you've been able to put the pieces together and move forward. The most important unit of recovery is still the individual in their home. And the reason, you lose the home, you lose the neighborhood, you lose the neighborhood, you lose the tax benefit, you lose your economy, you lose your opportunities for people. And I've been famous for saying, I don't care how many poor people there are. I'm still going to say that. I don't care how many poor people there are in Houston. I care if they get up and do everything they know how to do. It should add up to a way of life that gives them something to look forward to. It should add up to opportunity. So I care about whether or not you do everything you know how to do, put together all the aid you can you remake your life? Mm-hmm. And I think the case management it's not sexy sounding, but it's critical to help people make decisions and avoid mistakes with the scarce resources at their disposal.
Right. I'd like to go to Gloria. Angela mentioned capacity. And that has been so important in this city because federal aid hasn't been flowing really quickly. I know that the city announced last week that $1 billion in federal recovery aid for individuals is finally going to start flowing next month. You've been really working directly with FEMA. Tell me how that aspect of the recovery is going.
So right after Harvey, the city received $163 million, of which $56.2 million was for emergency protective services. That was for overtime for police and fire and some emergency purchase orders. Another $112 million was for storm debris. As y'all remember, there were tons of debris out on the streets that needed to be picked up. I'd like to pose a question to the audience. How much money do you think would you envision 15 months later coming from FEMA to the city of Houston? Any ideas?
Shout out.
$3 million, $3.3 million. And that is very interesting and challenging from the city's end to know that we have spent alone on the city side just for city infrastructure almost $200 million to get into some of the buildings that were impacted. And we're talking about libraries and City Hall and the annex and municipal courts. So while the city has put out, almost $200 million, what FEMA has reduced is only $3.3 million. And actually that funding, Angela, was coming for non-congregate sheltering. Mm-hmm. So it was the immediate housing that came in. So the challenge that we have is the money is dwindling, coming in little by little, but more importantly, the funding that you talked about, Kathleen, has to do with housing and urban development. It's the CDBG disaster recovery dollars that are coming in, and again, people say, why is it taking so long? It's a bureaucracy all the way from the feds as it comes down to the state, and then ultimately to the city of Houston. So while that is a challenge, the good news is I think the city has been able to put plans in effect in order to determine how do we use that money, whether it be on mitigation needs, on infrastructure, on individual housing, the case management that Angela has mentioned. It was critical for us to ensure that procurements were put in place proactively so that we would be FEMA compliant and HUD compliant. Because what we don't want to have happen is receive this federal money, whether it be through HUD or through FEMA, and then have to pay it back because every I was dotted and T was not crossed.
And that happens a lot.
Yeah. Exactly. So one of the things that our mayor has challenged is that we're maximizing recovery, reducing potential deobligations, and the slow process of the funds coming in has helped us to get ourselves together for that.
When it comes to mitigation, that can sometimes be something that's really hard to rally public support for. Have you been surprised at how since the hurricane now the city has increased the elevation requirements in the floodplain? Harris County, on the anniversary of the hurricane in August, passed this $2.5 billion bond issue that will quadruple the monies for mitigation. Have you said, why don't we have that support before the storm?
Houstonians have always understood that there is no free lunch. You have to pay for the infrastructure investments, and our bond elections have been successful. One of the problems, though, is that $2 billion is a fraction of what's needed. We've been paralyzed in the region. To our east, you have the Gulf, and you have the potential for hurricanes. To our west, we are the funnel that leads the water that falls in the Austin area in central Texas. We're between it and the ocean, and we have needed to make a multi-billion-dollar investment in more flood mitigation reservoirs on that side. So we had a lion on one side and a tiger on the other side, and we just did this, and we're not going to. We can't figure out where to spend our money, and we couldn't reach a regional consensus on what to do it. I really salute Judge Emmett and Harris County for stepping up and making the decision to begin the investment, but it's a beginning investment. This area flooded before there was a single human being here. It is a fact of our geography, and we are going to have to figure out how to live with it and be more resilient going forward.
Before we go to the audience for questions, I would love to ask you ladies what you think then about, say, Houston Stronger's 8-county plan that would spend like $60 billion on mitigation. I mean, is there yet a real definitive concept of what a flood-resilient Houston will look like?
So it's my great hope that some of that money gets spent on innovation. As I travel the world and watch what cities and communities do after storms, it's a great opportunity to rethink the materials you use, the design of the structures that you build. We should take advantage of the opportunity to be creative and innovative. And I just returned from Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico was pretty much told you're on your own, and they used the you're on your own opportunity to create some mini grids that communities could use for power in the event the power's down, to look at brand new materials to use for homes that would actually take on water and then be able to rebuild more quickly. I think Houston wants recovery, so we want to go right back to what we had as quickly as possible, and we need to renew, that is, go forward to something new and different, because we will have to live with water. That's true.
Gloria?
One of the things that we're doing is working closely with Harris County on mitigation options. We have the flood czar, everybody knows Stephen Costello, who's really, his whole job is to look at innovative options on how to deal with mitigation within the city of Houston. We've submitted our prioritization through TDM in order to look at these are the kind of projects that we want to do. What does that look like? Whether it be for city infrastructure, whether it be for long-term water flowways through the Lake Houston Dam. I mean, there are many of opportunities, and I will say in the past, even from back in the day with Mayor Lanier and some of the other, there is no need or no support, I think, for mitigation options. So finally we realized, wait a minute, Houston has left money on the table, and until we get the plans together in order to seek some mitigation dollars, this 8-county consortium that Kathleen is referencing would help to fortify, move forward, renew, and build a stronger region. And that's kind of what we're looking for. But it's not something that happens overnight. As many of y'all know, the Ike Dike that had been discussed back during Hurricane Ike, just last month, funding was secured in order to that. So that was something that it took 16 years to get to the point. I'm hoping we don't wait 16 years to ensure all the mitigation dollars that are coming to the Houston and Harris County area are not spent appropriately, but it's a long-term solution, and it's going to take some time to get us to that point.
All right, let's go to questions. And we have one right here in the front. Wait, let's wait for the microphone. We've got a mic runner coming your way. And if you would introduce yourself, please.
I'm Mayor Scott of Brookshire, Texas, and it's not really a question, it's a compliment. Thank you, you fine leaders, for fearlessly telling the truth.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, maybe on this side. Let's be equal opportunity back here.
Hi, my name is Margaret Adams. I have a question for Ms. Blanchard from Baker Ripley. You mentioned that a year after disaster, you see kind of paths diverge, and that you've got those who are able to persevere and those who are overwhelmed. From a recovery perspective, what can a community do to help those who have become overwhelmed? Because obviously, we can't move forward if we don't bring everybody with us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So if you're talking about a specific neighborhood, what can you do? It's a careful observation of your neighbors. If 3 houses got water and 3 houses had gotten repair and the 4th has not, something's wrong. And obviously that person, many times seniors will not admit to damage there for fear of losing their home. So seniors are particularly vulnerable, as are people, as Anise quite frequently reminds us, people with concerns for their documentation status may not want to open up about damage in their home. So in your community, that's one thing you can do. I think beyond that, it's a better overall sense. We don't have a clear sense of the risk involved. I think the city and the county are both doing much more, and many of you in this room, to educate communities about the choices they're making. If you continue to live here, you will be flooded. And so those two things, people not connected to their neighborhoods with no one checking on them, are the ones that get bogged down, get overwhelmed. Where you have people checking on them and people saying, this is how we did it, here's how you can do it, we'll find someone to help you, they are able to move forward better. I want to make one short comment. Sure. In previous disasters, FEMA provided to directly through the county and the city to case management organizations the information about who was impacted. This time it was only provided in aggregate. So every person who had already filed with FEMA had to refile and then find a case management agency, be linked through 211, which we did as fast as we could, but we lost valuable time not having our own information about who was affected and where those pockets of where many people that were affected existed. So we should demand, these are our people, this is our information, and going forward, we need that information, we need it immediately. So people don't have to find us, we can find them quickly.
Well, let's hope FEMA's listening. All right, let's go to another question. Here, back on this side.
Hello, my name is Fahad. Thank you. This was such a good conversation. The concept of renewing versus recovering was really interesting, and my question is to all three. How do you renew at a time when people are trying to survive? How do you try to innovate when people are trying to survive and when there's capacity constraint?
Okay. Who would like to take that?
You know, I think that you underestimate people's ability to adapt to circumstances and thrive. And there are always capacity constraints. Crisis gives you an opportunity to rethink what you do. It gives often an opportunity for a a fresh slate to start over. It certainly gives, here in this region, it's given us an opportunity from a government standpoint to make changes that were politically unpalatable or impossible before. But this isn't, kind of going back to the last question as well, we have to have a real conversation because everybody wants to get back to normal as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
You have to understand there is a new normal. It's not what we were before. And this is, as Angela said, a major disaster recovery. It's 3 to 5 years to the new normal, not to get back to where you were. Right. And we don't talk about that enough. And for those who are unaffected, or largely, there are large swaths of this region who had no damage. And a week after the storm, when the rain finally stopped, we were all back to work. And we have to continue to remind people that this is an ongoing process and that it's not here we're done going forward.
I would just end by saying that we have to build forward, not build back. And it's really just following up from Anissa's conversation and comment. Building forward requires innovation, requires communication, requires partnerships throughout the county, throughout the city, and throughout the surrounding counties.
And thank you, audience, for your fabulous questions. And join me in thanking my wonderful guests. Were they fabulous or what? Anise, Angela, Gloria. Thank you, ladies.
Next, Renewal Texas Style. Please welcome Gordon Hartman, founder of the Gordon Hartman Foundation, and please welcome back Ron Brownstein.
Hey. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. So the Renewal Project for the last several years has been based on the idea of finding people around the country who are renewing their communities from the grassroots up. And as we have been around in many different cities around America, we have found very few examples of an individual who really embodies this idea as much as you do. Your work in the disabled community, starting in San Antonio and moving beyond, really, I think, encapsulates what we have seen from so many local innovators, this conviction that I'm not going to wait for anybody. I'm just going to deal with this problem myself. Can you tell us about your daughter, Morgan, and how she inspired you to do this work and to build what you call Morgan's Wonderland, which I think we have a little image of here.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks to the Atlantic and to Allstate for putting this on. A great event. Morgan is, I'm very blessed. My wife and I are very blessed to have a special needs daughter who you see there, Morgan. And I had the opportunity about 14 years ago to retire and sell many companies that I had been running. And Morgan is, even though she's 25 now, she has severe cognitive delay. She's at the level of about a 4 or 5-year-old. And she has also had numerous surgeries. She has 26 screws in her back, 2 rods. And so she's had to go through back surgery, lung surgeries, many other things. And what basically I wanted to do as I retired was to spend the second half of my life in giving back towards assisting those with special needs, simply because Morgan has been such an inspiration and has really taught myself, my family, and so many people about the fragileness of life, if you will. And so how Morgan's Wonderland came about was Morgan and I and my wife were on a trip, and we went swimming, and Morgan wanted to play with some other children in the pool, but because she could not verbalize to them, they quickly, and she was attempting to try to play with them, they grabbed the ball and ran out of the pool real quick. And as I tell you that, I can see that happening right now, and it was something where she just kind of turned to me and looked at me like, Dad, why won't they accept me? And so that always kind of stayed with me, and as I started thinking about it, I thought, well, where can we take Morgan, who has severe issues with special needs, and found that it was very difficult for us to take her to certain parks. A lot of the parks we took her to, she couldn't participate in things because of issues that she had, whether it be from a physical perspective or cognitive because of lighting or sounds or whatever. We couldn't take her to a place like Disney World. Even though they're very good about ADA, there are just certain restrictions when you're dealing with an issue like Morgan has. And so that's where we came with the concept of the idea of let's develop a place that is ultra accessible, meaning no matter how acute someone's special need may be, and fully inclusive, so that would be with those with special needs and those without special needs would come together and play. And that was the development of Morgan's Wonderland.
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking that how unusual the insight is to see something that isn't there, that the absence of young people like your daughter, in some ways, is to see that they're not there and find in a Disneyland or a conventional park, and from seeing someone who is kind of excluded. Obviously, by definition, if you're excluded, you know, you're not there,
right.
and yet you were able to see that absence and respond to it.
Well, it affected me as a father, and so it was something that I felt. And here's the beautiful part about all this: so many people came together, not just in San Antonio, but Texas, around the country, and even outside the country, and us being able to build Morgan's Wonderland, Morgan's Inspiration Island, which is a $55 million park.
Well, let's talk about that, because I mean, it's one thing to build a park. It's another thing to build a water park.
Right.
You know, because people would say, well, you know, water and wheelchairs are not the most natural combination. Kind of like whiskey and Seconal, as people say. How did you deal with that problem and the logistical challenge of creating a park?
Well, there are a lot of issues, especially Morgan's Inspiration Island. By the way, I love to state that I
think we have an image of that as well.
We're very proud that it was recently noted as one of the 100 greatest places in the world. Morgan's Inspiration Island was. And the beauty of Morgan's Inspiration Island is that, yes, we had to think about the fact that we had to keep it ultra accessible. And keeping it ultra accessible meant that even if someone came in their wheelchair that was battery operated, that we had to be able to find a way to where we could put them in a wheelchair that would work another way, so that they could go where within Morgan's Inspiration Island and still enjoy it. So we basically developed a wheelchair working with the University of Pittsburgh that works off a compressed air, pneumatic wheelchair. So again, everybody is able to enjoy it.
So you had to develop your own wheelchair.
We have our own wheelchair. It's the only type of pneumatic wheelchair. It can actually go underwater and still work. And so it allows the opportunity for others. This is a sample of Morgan's Inspiration Island. And that wheelchair you see, there's actually a wheelchair that when you come there, and if you're in a wheelchair, we actually put you in a wheelchair that we have designed, because that has special fabric, special mechanisms within it that can handle the water. If you were to go into a wheelchair on a couple of times within the water park, your wheelchair would have problems after a while. So we actually had to develop also the wheelchair as well to ensure ultra accessibility.
So is your audience Texas or the country or the world?
Well, when we first built Morgan's Wonderland, we didn't know what our audience was. And we built before we added on Morgan's Inspiration Island, we built this park and said, God, we hope someone shows up. And what we found is that we actually well exceeded our original expectations. And now people from all 50 states, and we started the season with 69 countries that had actually come. People have come from 69 countries. We actually finished with 73 different countries that have now come to Morgan's Wonderland, Morgan's Inspiration Island. And it continues to grow. And many people make trips from overseas, from all over the world, now on a continual basis. And you say, well, why would that be? Why would you come so far? Well, if you have a son or daughter or someone you care for that has special needs, for them to be able to participate in something that they just can't participate in anywhere else, because of, not that we've done anything overly magical or overly creative, we've just taken a time out and said, what can we adjust on every ride? For example, in Morgan's Wonderland, all 26 different activities, to ensure that no matter how acute someone's special need may be, we're talking about people who are on breathing apparatus, people in wheelchairs, people who are nonverbal, whatever the case may be, that they can play and be engaged with people who may not have a special need, and it's a full inclusive environment, and it's a culture of inclusion, and that's what people are looking for.
Can I ask you, where did you go to find the expertise? I mean, you know, there are people who create rides for Disney or you know, Magic Mountain or Six Flags, but where did you go to find the expertise to create the rides?
Well, we went to a lot of places, and I think the best place to go is to start with the people that you want to assist, and that is with special needs individuals, and talking to their families and caregivers and parents and aunts and uncles and everybody. But then we went to doctors, we went to therapists, and we continued to have meeting after meeting and said, wait a second, we thought this would work. Well, no, that's not going to work. And you can't do this because that will happen. And it just was an amazing process of a giving back and forth. And what's amazing about the development of Morgan's Wonderland, from the time we had that incident in the pool that I talked about to the time that we opened, was 39 months. Extremely quick. But the reason we were able to do that is because so many people came together so quickly to say, let's make this happen. And so, because we started off with a blank piece of paper and said, how are we going to do this? And we had so many different ideas, so many different thoughts. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? But quickly found out, well, wait, we have to zero in on these particular things because based on all the different input we received from people.
Beyond the parks, where else is your family foundation focusing in terms of expanding opportunity?
Well, what we do is we work with nonprofits that want to get bigger, and also people who have a passion to want to form nonprofits to help special needs individuals. We're very involved in that because what we find is there's a lot of people who want to develop or have nonprofits and help people, but sometimes they don't know how to get from point A to point B to point C. If we can help them in that process very early and the passion is there to want to make it happen, the sky is the limit. And we've found that. We have so many case studies now where we've taken individuals who said, I want to make a difference, and by just working through issues with them have allowed them to do it. So our foundation is very involved.
Let me ask you, before we bring in the audience, a broader question. In terms of creating opportunity for people with, and you've been doing this for a while now, for people with special needs, to what extent can private initiative take the lead, and to what extent and where is public policy required?
Well, I mean, public policy, first of all, I'm going to give you a quick example on public policy on something. San Antonio has a city hall that's 120 years old. But if you were to go there before it's actually under remodel, and I'm going to tell you why in just a second, before if you were in a wheelchair, you had to go down this area where no one knew where to go exactly. You had to then ring a bell, hope that someone heard the bell, hope that someone who could get into the rooms through a special pass, then open the door for you, then you'd get an elevator, then go up to the floor, and then be able to talk to someone who could help you. That's if you were in a wheelchair or a walker. And that existed 2 years ago, and we said, that shouldn't be. So we went to the city and said, we've got to change how you enter the place where our government work is being done. And so I'm very proud of the fact that City Hall is in the process of being remodeled right now to ensure that everybody, not 80% of the population, 85% of the population, but 100% of the population will be able to enter City Hall. And we made that fully accessible. So government can play a role just by sometimes looking at things where people in the private sector can say, wait, there's an issue here. Hey, wait, you got to make a change here, and go to people and say, we've got to make a change and force the issue, if you will. And that's basically what we did.
And are there areas at all where government has been a partner in what you've been doing, or is this all?
What have we done with what I've talked about this morning has basically been private funds. The government did allow us to help us with some purchasing of the land early on in the process. But outside that, everything that we do now is still totally private. And Morgan's Wonderland offers everyone who has a special needs always gets in free. And the reason we do that is we're eliminating barriers for the element of play, but we didn't want to bring about another barrier called economics. And when you have a family or you're a caregiver for someone who has special needs, there are a lot of economic issues in respect to cost for medicine and doctors and things, so it's always free. And so we lose money every year, but we are able to bring those funds in privately. And we don't ask for any public assistance to be able to do that because we want to make sure that we can move as quickly as we can, as aggressively as we can. I'm not saying that government always slows things down, but things do go slower sometimes. And so our approach is let's move as quick as we can to assist as many people.
Let's bring in the audience if we have any questions. Over there, yeah. No?
I see hands going up, but I don't.
Yeah, it's over, and there's a hand back on the left. Yeah. There you go.
Hi, my name is Margaret Adams, and I'd like to ask you about your work with the disability community. When we're talking about renewal and especially recovery after a major disaster, what can the community do to better support those with disability and mobility access issues in evacuating, in recovery, and the resilience part of the community plan?
Well, I think the main thing is recognize that the number is large and recognize that someone needs to focus on the special needs community when issues do come up. We often think about, well, there's not that many people who have special needs. It actually represents almost 13% of our population. 40 million, over 40 million people in the United States have a special need. And so in a city like Houston, who has just gone through a terrible tragedy in respect to Harvey, you recognize how many people have special needs and are stuck in their homes, how many people who are visually impaired or hearing impaired and can't be able to do things that we many times take for granted. There has to be an immediate focus on that to ensure that we know where they are, what we can do to best assist them as quickly as possible.
Got a question over here.
Hi, my name is Heather Moore. I currently work for LISC, but I was advocate for United Cerebral Palsy back when ADA was being enacted. And my question is, to what extent do you think, so percentage-wise maybe, do you think that ADA has actually come to fruition?
Well, I think ADA has played a role. I mean, if you look at the last 27 or even longer years that it's been in existence, thank God that the Bush administration signed it into law, because it has been beneficial. The issue is that, and a lot of things have occurred, but a lot of things in respect to remodeling, unless you remodel, you don't have to make changes and things like that. So there are a lot of places still that are not accessible. But ADA only goes so far. And the difference between, if we had just built a park and worked off of what the ADA rules were, then we wouldn't be what we refer to as ultra accessible. We had to go a step further. We had to go outside the ADA and even well above it in ensuring ultra accessibility, so no matter how acute someone's special need may be, they can participate. So I think government has played a role in being able in bringing attention to the issue of special needs through ADA, but there's so much more that needs to be done. And, you know, when you talk about a special needs individual, you're not just talking about that person. It affects families. And there's a major multiplier effect on those 40 million people who have some form of special needs, that everybody, I'm sure almost everybody in this audience in some way has been affected or knows someone who has a special need. And so if we can do what we can to get more inclusion of them to participate and be involved, it's amazing the things that they can do. You know, we're working so aggressively, our foundation is, in being able to get those who have special needs more involved in the workforce, for example. Because, and what we're finding is employers love working with special needs individuals. They're wanting more of them. And this particular economy is helping us right now because of the fact that there's employers are going, hey, wait, what do you got?
That was the last question I wanted to ask you, which is real quick. I talked about partnerships with government. I'm interested, though, partnerships with the private sector. As you have been unfolding these efforts, has there been interest in other large employers?
There's no question. We have employers in San Antonio who are large employers. We're also finding national employers who are wanting to bring special needs in for lots of reasons that I hear. For example, they're on time. Many times they're even early. They do a great job. They're very focused. They really want to achieve the self-esteem that they get even allows them to even do better on their job going forward. And so we're finding more and more companies are having an incredible success in employing special needs individuals. And it's something that we really need to put focus on, because about the unemployment rate among special needs individuals is about 75%. Wow. So we have a long way to go in respect to really making sure that we accomplish that.
You've given us a tremendous example of what the idea of renewal is. And thank you, Gordon, for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here to lead the conversation is Len Cannon, anchor for KHOU 11 News.
Welcome to winter in Houston. At 4 o'clock, we'll have breaking news because I think a snowflake was found in Montgomery County. I'm serious. Mary Jane and I have a lot in common. Both Texas transplants, both came here in 2006, both came from the East Coast. What lured you here?
So what lured me here was the opportunity to join AIG, American General's business unit. I grew up in Connecticut, in the Hartford area, and in Hartford area, you tend to join the insurance industry. Like in Houston, people tend to join the oil and gas industry. And so I had the opportunity to come here in 2006 and join the American General team.
So opportunities got better. You wound up at Allstate in the position that you have now, but it required that you go to Chicago some of the time, and you said, I'm going to stay here part of the time. What was the decision behind splitting?
So for me, when I came here in 2006, I came here as a single mom with a 9-year-old daughter, and what struck Sabrina and I when we came down here was the incredible inclusiveness, welcoming, and diversity of the city. And so I just fell in love. And when the Allstate opportunity came up, I was excited about the opportunity to join such a wonderful organization, but just wasn't ready to close the chapter on Texas. You know, one of the things that struck me being here was also the benevolence of this community. And my first week here, when I was with American General, I remember going to a search luncheon, and being blown away by the power of the private sector coming together with nonprofit to really solve really big issues. It was powerful. So for me, it's been just fell in love, the inclusivity, the diversity, and the benevolence of a really special community.
I feel you, because I'm here for the same reason. It's a great family city as well. This is called Renewal, and we, of course, are in recovery from Harvey. Here it is, Harvey by the numbers. I'm going to remind everybody. We had a year's worth of rainfall in 4 days. And as everybody, if you're from Houston, you know we get a lot of rainfall. 154,000 homes flooded, 60,000 rescued. That's just by first responders, thousands more by civilian volunteers. What has been Allstate's role in this recovery process?
Let me start by talking about our philosophy on the role of business in society. And from our perspective, there are some economists who believe that Milton Friedman and Adam Smith, who believe that the role of a corporation is simply to generate a profit. Well, at Allstate, we don't accept that view. We believe that the role of business and business leaders is much broader than that, that we have a responsibility to create prosperity for all our stakeholders, for our employees, for the customers that we serve, and for the communities where our employees and customers live. And so we take that responsibility very seriously. And when you think about Allstate, we're also a very purpose-driven organization. We don't define ourselves by a company that provides insurance. We define ourselves, our mission is about helping our customers realize their hopes and dreams, helping to protect them from life's uncertainties, and of course, helping them rebuild when tragedy strikes.
Well, you couldn't get more uncertain than what we've had here. So what has the recovery looked like from the company's standpoint?
Well, from our perspective, we think of recovery when we think of our response to this is the business we're in. You think about, at the end of the day, someone, when they're buying a policy from us, what they're really buying is a promise. And when catastrophes strike, that's our moment of truth. That's the time where we step in and live into our commitment to help them through that period. And our philosophy is really around, first, helping with relief, second, helping with recovery, and then third, helping with rebuilding. And so what we did during the Harvey period was obviously we mobilized. It was fascinating to watch it from Northbrook. We were getting ready for what we knew was coming. We take great pride in being one of the first in when a catastrophe strikes to be able to help our customers. We believe it's the right thing to do. We went around town helping to educate not just our customers, but consumers. You heard earlier today the complexity of navigating through the government and the different aid programs. And so we created a disaster recovery guide. We held education seminars, once again, not just for our customers, but for the community. Then we started with the recovery. We contributed $1.5 million to organizations like Red Cross, Feeding America, youth empowerment around the country that was focused on raising dollars to help Hurricane Harvey victims. And then with rebuilding, we've actually helped to restore all the books in 4 Houston schools that were destroyed. We also rebuilt a playground in Pasadena in an elementary school so that the kids could have a safe place to play. And so from our perspective, our role is not just to settle claims, it's to help the community and the customers and our employees. We have over 450 small business owners, agency owners in the Houston area, who also were impacted, who are out there helping our customers. So we have a strong sense of commitment to them and the customers that they serve. And so those were some of the things we did to help support the relief, the recovery, and the rebuilding of our great community.
The scale of this storm was so large and affected so many people in the Houston area, not just here, but all the way down the coast to parts of Corpus Christi and further. What lessons have you learned about something of this magnitude? Are there things you could have done better? Are there things you wish you had done?
One of my favorite learnings coming out of Harvey was we had set up a shop outside of a big box retailer, and someone had left their pet behind. It was a dog. And what our claims people saw was how as our customers came to get help, how much comfort they got from that pet being there. And so we've now implemented actually pet therapy when catastrophes strike around the country. We're actually now bringing in pets to help our customers and provide some support to them. One of the things we've learned, and we did some recent work, was to really evaluate how did Houston do post-recovery. And what we found was that about 60% of folks really relied on family and friends. And about 35% went to their local community for support. And so that in many ways validates our view that we need to, as the private sector, continue to partner with the public sector to really drive community investment and make those communities stronger.
And that follows up there. I was going to ask you, do you find going it alone based on your policies and your customers, but clearly you have learned that partnering with other people gives you a broader reach?
We really believe strongly in the power of bringing public and private sector together, that together the sum of the parts are much greater, and that we can be much more effective, have a much bigger impact, and really supporting those on the ground locally that are closer to the issues and can really make that difference much more impactfully and effectively.
I was quoting some numbers a little bit earlier about the impact, but you have some data you want to share today as it relates to rebuilding. What are you talking about?
Well, we actually reached out to consumers and the community to get their perspective on how we were doing, how the economy, how Houston was doing in a post-Harvey world, and how people felt supported and where did they find the support they needed to rebuild their lives. And as I mentioned earlier, what we found was that most people still are relying on friends and family. That local community was also front and center, with 35% of them saying that's where they went for help. And only 16% actually felt that the government was where they went for their support. What we've also found, and this is I mentioned a little earlier, is that we still need to do more to prepare for these events in the future. So we're making progress, but it's much too slow. And so we need to continue to educate, make sure people do have the flood insurance that they need, that they understand how it works and how it doesn't work. And so the education part of this is important as we continue to educate and prepare, because we know life will continue to be uncertain.
We know in Houston there were so many stories where people said, I've lived in this house for 70 years and it never flooded, and suddenly it floods. We get these what we call a once-in-a-whatever event, but these once-in-a-lifetime events now seem to happen several times. How do you plan? How do you deal with that?
I think part of it gets back to the education and helping people understand the tools and resources that are available to them. Part of it is also being there and providing that education and support. And so one of the things that we tried to do during the Harvey period was really reach out to the community very broadly. And really help them understand where they could go for help, how they could navigate that complexity. And I would like to think that that creates a foundation and a support system for future events to the extent that they occur.
I wonder if there was anything, maybe more than one instance during Harvey. Remember the first 4 weeks, it was almost like a twilight zone around here, because it was post all the damage, but now you're looking at what do we do? Does anything stand out to you as you sat back and looked at what was going on, given your position?
For me, it gets back to the three tenors of our focus on helping a community, the focus on recovery and rebuilding. And what struck me in being part of watching the recovery of Houston was the way that the community did come together. The way that not only Allstate, but other corporations stepped in to help their neighbors and our colleagues really recover from what was a very difficult situation.
Yeah. I know you're a Texans fan, but we had a baseball team that said, oh, the city is down, we're going to go win a championship. That was kind of nice.
Yeah, it was awesome. That was awesome. That was awesome.
Mary Jane Fortin, it's been a pleasure. I have one final question, and it perhaps is the most important. Are you in good hands? I'm sorry. I couldn't help it. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, please welcome Neil Mallon Bush, founder and co-chair of the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation. Back to lead the conversation is Kathleen Koch.
Neil, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I have to get something up front right now. I am an avid reader. I am a published author and a huge fan of your mom. So I am completely biased, all right?
Okay,
Just want you to know starting out.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us about the foundation and how it got started. Why was literacy so important to your mother and to you? It's really personal.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate this forum, and thank you all for being here. Just by way of further introduction, I'm the third son of Barbara Bush, kind of one of the non-political members of a very political family. I've inherited my mother's, or I've embraced my mother's long-time commitment to supporting and raising awareness around literacy. My mother had a core belief, and that is that if you can't read at an age-appropriate level, you can't possibly realize your fullest God-given potential. If you think about it, if you can't read in 3rd grade, you can't succeed as a student in 4th grade or 5th grade or 6th grade. If you can't read as an adult, you know, the barriers for your fullest success in life are really tremendous. And so my wife and I decided 5 years ago to start the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation to shine a bright light on Houston's literacy issues, to shamelessly use my mother's interest in this topic in her backyard.
But it was really a personal struggle for you as well, because as a child you had dyslexia. I mean,
Yes.
Did you initially hate reading?
I did hate reading. I hated school. I hated school because school was so reading-centric, and I didn't do very well in school. I remember my mom telling me, I don't have a great memory, but when I was in 3rd grade, apparently, we were sitting around a reading session. The book was being passed from one kid to the other kid. The moms were invited to sit in. It got to me, and the kid to my left was reading words because I was struggling to find the words. The kid to my right, the teacher chipped in, and my mom realized at that point that I couldn't read. In 3rd grade, I was struggling to read. And so she did everything a great mom would do. So on weekends, you know, she would try to find some remediation. This is before dyslexia was a well-known, condition.
Right.
And since
I
then,
understand there was a high school teacher who even told her, he'll never graduate,
well,
never go to college.
So I moved from Houston to Washington, D.C. on my 12th birthday. Dad was elected to Congress. We moved to Washington, D.C. And when I got to Washington, I was admitted to a very nice prep school, St. Albans High School. And I struggled so hard for a variety of reasons, including my dyslexia, that the high school counselor suggested to my mom that I wouldn't graduate from high school. So she was struck. Can you imagine? My parents went through an awful lot. They lost a daughter to leukemia, which is the ultimate sadness, I think, in life. But to see a son struggle and not to be able to really do much about it, it had to be really crushing and difficult for Mom. But she's always loved me the most.
And she was very upfront about that, I see.
She said that publicly when I'm present, but she's probably said the same thing about us. But I think moms love the kids that struggle the most. And so as a kid, I was challenged as a low literacy guy. I'm not sure that was my main motivation for getting involved in wanting to promote my mom's legacy. And I'm not sure my struggle with reading was one of the key contributors to Mom's taking up literacy as a cause. It's more foundational than that. It's way more fundamental than just a learning disability. There are too many kids in this country who are born with a God-given ability who don't realize that God-given ability in large part because of where they're born and the resources they don't have or the conditions that they were raised in. And those conditions are all addressable. And my mom understood that if you can't read at an age-appropriate level, you can't realize your God-given potential. So there's a mission, there's a cause way more than her son struggling with dyslexia and having some challenge. By the way, I did overcome my dyslexia to the extent that I graduated from this prep school. I went to undergraduate. I got a master's in business, so I did very well. And I determined, and it's true, that if you read something of interest, then you're intrinsically motivated to do well. So the more choices I can make in college and business school, the better I did. And I ended up getting straight A's and, against all odds.
So how bad is the problem here in Houston, and is it reflective of the problem nationwide when it comes to illiteracy?
It's incredible to me that politicians and that society isn't really focused on literacy and other social issues as intensely as we should be. In Houston, Texas, and I think it does reflect a national crisis, too many kids are raised in poverty. 38% of kids are categorized as living in poverty. 1 out of 4 adults live in poverty in Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas is one of the richest, strongest economic centers in the United States of America. To me, it's shameful that we have that high of a degree. Kids raised in poverty hear 30 million fewer words spoken to them. They have 1 book for every 300 households compared to middle-income homes where the average kid has 12 books. So when kids go to the pre-K through pre-K into kindergarten, they're ill prepared to learn, according to the incoming tests. 60% of the kids are ill prepared to learn literacy skills.
And so the 20%, that's the number, right, in Houston? 20% of adults, at least,
Yeah,
are illiterate?
20% of adults are functionally illiterate, but it starts at the very beginning. There needs to be an intense focus on helping kids. To get a daycare license takes 24 hours of training. I mean, to become a hairstylist, you have to go through more training than to become a daycare, So kids that are raised in poverty start off disadvantaged. And sadly, in Houston, Texas, only 1 in 5 kids taking the 3rd grade test pass with flying colors. 1 in 4 kids fail the test, which requires 20 out of 40 questions to be answered correctly. Those kids, when you fail the 3rd grade test, have a much higher probability of dropping out. And those kids that do end up graduating are graduating from our high schools ill-prepared for college, ill-prepared for the workplace. In fact, kids that go to community colleges require tons of remediation. It takes $70 million back when we did. So the first thing Maria and I did, by the way, if you don't mind my going back a step, we conducted a citywide analysis we hired a fabulous leader, Dr. Julie Baker-Fink, who's out there somewhere. If you get a chance to meet Julie, you'll see why the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation is doing so well. Julie and I recruited Deloitte. Deloitte's given us over 5,000 hours of pro bono services. We brought 90 stakeholders from the community to talk about literacy. We analyzed over 80, they analyzed over 80 research papers and came to these conclusions about Houston's literacy crisis. It's a crisis that affects every age group. It's a crisis that affects every one of us with higher crime rates, higher cost for education, remediation, those kinds of things. So we have a real problem.
I guess what I would love to know more about is what is the foundation doing to change everything that you've listed?
We're doing a number of amazing things. One, raising awareness is a really critical need. I don't think enough people understand. We hear a lot about STEM. This is a very energy-centric, science and technology, and that's really important for more women and more people to become involved as engineers. You can't be successful in STEM if you can't read at an age-appropriate level, right? So,
right.
So we are raising awareness. So while Mom was alive, we teamed her up with Dwight Howard, for example, one of the stars of the Houston Rockets at the time. Big, giant Dwight Howard and my little diminutive and shrinking mother did some PAs together. J.J. Watt, who's a hero in Houston, and J.J.'s having a great year. Thank God the Texans are back. But my mom and JJ had a kind of a wonderful romance and did work together. So we were using Mom kind of to help raise awareness. We've brought coalitions together to address and been supportive of coalitions. So for example, there's a thing called Early Matters, which the Greater Houston Partnership has been leading, but it involves all the stakeholders in literacy, focused on 3rd grade reading levels. We're focusing that effort on neighborhoods, thinking that we're going to have a much higher impact if we bring remedies to individual neighborhoods, see much higher kind of, moonshot type results. We've also established programs. One of the big gaps, as I already mentioned, is the book gap. Too few kids living in poverty, under-resourced kids, have home libraries. So we've started a My Home Library program. At the end of this year, we will have given out 25,000 home libraries, which includes 6 books that kids get to choose of their own choosing. We've worked with 5 or 6 publishing companies who are, and we buy these books. So for a donation of $30, if you go to our website for a $30 donation, you can provide a home library to a kid. And so we've had corporate sponsors, sponsor whole schools, and it's a fabulous program.
Now, what about with Harvey? There were a lot of libraries flooded, including one named after your mom.
The Barbara Bush.
Well, how has that changed your mission?
It's really hasn't changed our mission. It's added to the mission of wanting to get those libraries up and running. So that we have a Ladies for Literacy Guild. Mom is so well regarded, and ladies flocked to join the Barbara Bush Ladies for Literacy Guild. These ladies have been inspirational in their activism. So they've raised a bunch of money. With that money, they built out a thing called the Curiosity Cruiser, which is a mobile library that goes to the inner cities, and because of generous book donations, we're able to give out books to kids. There's programmatic activity. It's actually an asset of the Harris County Public Library now that we've given to them, and we support them in any way we can by having these collaborations. So this mobile library can go to places where there's been disruption. Wonderful. And serve the needs of those communities.
And before we go to questions, I'd like to ask, do you think that the mission of literacy and education is even more critical today in the fractured political times in which we live, when there are so many deliberate attempts to mislead and divide Americans?
Yeah, my mom would warn me right now not to get off on my Donald Trump statements, because but it's amazing to me that in this country we've elected a guy like Donald Trump, and I'm sorry for Donald Trump fans out there, and I'm not political, but it does show there's been a breakdown in our education system, truthfully, to me, that a guy and that's not to say that I condemn things that are being accomplished. I regret things that can't be accomplished. But the thing I regret most is just the behavior. My brother served as president. You don't have to agree with what he did or didn't do, but he had a respect for the office. He like my father and President Obama and Clinton. I think they served with a certain sense of humility. And so it's more the image of the presidency. And I think an educated populace would have seen through some of the rhetoric. This caravan's coming and we're having an invasion on our borders. That's bullshit, okay? That's bullshit. And so, sorry. My mother would have definitely pulled the hook on that.
I guess you get that plain spokenness from your mom.
Yeah. She would have, on the one hand, applauded the comment, but on the other hand, punished me for saying it. But anyway.
Well, let's go quickly to the audience. I know we don't have a lot of time, and I'm sorry for not giving folks notice. Anyone have any questions? Okay, right over here.
How do you see?
Got a mic runner on the way. Here you go. And if you would just identify yourself, please. Thank you.
Yeah, Damon Wells. I work at the Beacon downtown, which provides homeless services, like day center type activities. And I run into clients constantly, like mid-40s adults just buried with paperwork that they're having trouble understanding, even with their caseworkers. What are like some day-to-day things or kind of small steps we could take to help them understand their own paperwork and activities they're trying to complete?
First of all, thank you for your service in the community. So the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation wouldn't be the place for he or others like him to go. There are adult learning centers all over Houston, Texas, that are training adults to learn the practical needs of being literate, so that they can fill out forms and handle that. There's some really amazing programs. One thing I failed to mention, and maybe this could be inspiring to some of you in the room, one of the things we've done at the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation, which I'm most proud of, is my father has always advocated for volunteerism. We live in a democracy. You can complain like I do all day long about our president, but every one of us has the democratic right to roll up your sleeves and become involved in the lives of others.
1,000 points of light.
1,000 points of light. Mm-hmm. And so the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation has put up a volunteer platform called connect4literacy.org. If you go to that website, you can see lots of volunteer opportunities, including adult literacy, but also working with younger kids, working in HISD schools, as a mentor, as a Houston Read volunteer, which I am. There's so many ways you can volunteer to help out, and I hope you will.
You have another question? Well, I wanted to ask, here we have one. No? Okay. Oh, I have one for you.
Yes.
I understand before your mom died, you read to her.
Yeah, you're going to make
I mean,
me
you
cry.
live right across the street from her,
Yeah.
right? So you were very close. What did you read?
So first of all, this may make me teary, but I'm going to try to fight through it because I've got the genetic predisposition to be a little sentimental. So just a warning, as if my wife was here, she'd be kicking me already. So my dad actually has been in and out of the hospital for a number of years. And so when he would go into the hospital, I would read to Mom and Dad in the hospital. And then, okay, and then when he would come home, I'm sorry, okay, we're good. We would continue reading. And so I've read probably 14 books over the past 4 years. And the favorite books, start with that, Candace Millard. I don't know if any of you have ever read the 3 books she's written are historical novels about historical characters, but she picks certain specific scenes out of their lives, and it's just beautifully written. If you feel like you're with Churchill when he goes and fights the Boers War, or you feel like you're, Roosevelt as he's navigating the river in Brazil in the Amazon, it's just fabulous books. Mom loved those, Dad liked those as well. Read a number of historical novels about the origination of the U.S., the Revolutionary War, and those kind of things. They both loved those. The last book I read was the Barbara Bush memoirs.
That must have been really special with her. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So people would always come up after my mom passed away and say, "I'm so sorry your mom passed away." The reality is that after reading that book, it really reminded me and her and Dad of the remarkable life that they've lived. So don't feel sorry for my mom. She lived to be 92 years old. I'm sorry, I'm good. That she was married to the same guy for 73 years. She traveled all over the world. She saw and met and did interesting things. She raised 5 kids. She lost one to leukemia, but raised 5 kids. One became president of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing her with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm a little tired, by the way. I get tearier when I get tired. I'm a little tired. We celebrated my wife's 56, or she'll kill me that I brought the
You never talk about a woman's weight or age. You should know that.
She's a 108. Just kidding. That's the weight. Anyway, so I was up a little late last night, so.
Well, Neil,
she's really going to kill me now.
I hate to say we're out of time, but thank you. Give your best to give our best to your dad for us. Thank you very much.
Oh,
thank you.
Sorry.
Up next, we'll hear from 2 university presidents. Please welcome David Lebron of Rice University and Ranu Couture of the University of Houston. The Atlantic's Ron Brownstein is back to lead the conversation.
Good morning, President. One thing we have seen as we have been around the country is that cities are increasingly relying on what they call their anchor institutions to become axes of growth and development, hospitals, foundations, universities. I'm wondering how the thinking has changed at each of your institutions over the last few years about the role that you can and should play in helping to revitalize the communities where you operate.
So I think universities have been catalysts for economic growth and development, at least in this country, since they have been formed. And I think we have always been thinking in the same manner. For us, I have been here in Houston now for 11 years, almost. And I can tell you 11 years ago, when I came here, that was one of the things I came, not because I knew University of Houston so well at that point in time. I came from Florida. But I came here because I knew the Houston. I knew the Houston's economy. And I said, it doesn't make any sense to have an institution, a public research university, that is not a tier 1 university in a city like Houston. There's just no way. So I came with my personal agenda of that we need to build a university for Houston, whether Houston demands it or not. And sure enough, I mean, Houston has been so supportive, and I think we have always seen our role as being that anchor institution, whether it's workforce, whether it's intellectual capital, and we continue to do that in so many different ways.
President LeBron?
Yeah, so what we have really learned is we can both be a global institution and be an institution that's very committed to our home city of Houston and Harris County and the surrounding area. I think universities, particularly urban universities, are playing a critical role, many different roles across the city. And so when we, for example, did our strategic plan about 12 or 13 years ago, one of our planks was that we would engage with the city of Houston. That was really, as the Rice expression, get out beyond the hedges. It's a great resource for educating our students. We had many research efforts that we could engage with in the city. But we recently sat down to redo our strategic plan. And that plank emerged this time as to engage with and empower the city of Houston. And we've seen that, for example, in our role in developing the Midtown Innovation District, which is really a district.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about that as like kind of a specific example and how it differs from the way you might have interacted with the community 5, 10 years ago?
Again, I was recently asked the question whether strategic plans matter, and they do. And so we had developed a strategic plan that we were going to engage with and empower the city of Houston. And when we saw this need and an opportunity, we took back the land. We had sort of leased it to Sears, and Sears has had a few difficulties. And so we took back that land. That was about 9.5 acres. We now have over 14 acres. And for example, we were clear from the beginning, this was not going to be a Rice-branded project. This was not to expand Rice to Midtown. We had a vision for this. We had the land, and we've made a very substantial investment in this property to really put forth a piece of what Houston needs to become a real center of technology and innovation. And we have such a fantastic base to build upon in this city with the energy industry and the medical enterprises in the city. So we had no doubt that this was something we wanted to do that would help not just the future of Houston, but also actually our future. We need to be in a city that's known as a tech city.
And so the ongoing role for Rice in a project like this, beyond the initial investment and the initial kind of conception, what is your kind of ongoing relationship, and does that envision a different kind of level of involvement than you've had previously?
Well, it clearly does. So the property is owned by what we call the Rice Management Company, which holds the assets of our endowment, and so it will manage the property. But it otherwise won't be directly managed by the university. Again, all sort of 10 principal institutions of higher education in the city of Houston signed on to participate. And so we hope all of those institutions, some were about equidistant to the property from the University of Houston. Houston Community College is really 2 blocks away. Texas Southern is a little further. The University of St. Thomas isn't far away. So we want this property to evolve into a real anchor for technology and innovation and startups in the city of Houston, which isn't to say there won't be many other areas around the city that serve a similar role.
Well, you have a third ward initiative. That's where University of Houston is located. Talk a little bit about, same kind of question, what that engagement actually looks like, and does it represent a evolving of the role of the university with the surrounding community?
It absolutely does. So we live it every day, the divide in Houston or the income gap. Our neighborhood, which is Third Ward, high crime, low socioeconomic status. And 10 years ago, since you've been asking as to how it has evolved, 10 years ago, I felt the University of core commitment, core mission, and core mission being, our graduation rate for students was just like what it typically is. We have to own our core mission, and let's make sure the student success becomes our no excuse top priority. And as we grew that, as we developed that, and as we evolved into a tier 1 institution, the question came, well, shouldn't we have a tier 1 neighborhood for our tier 1 institution? But the problem was historically we just hadn't had a very engaged relationship. So we sat down with the community leaders and we said, well, what is it that we can bring to the table? It's not that we have solution for you, because that's the first thing you'd never do, and tell them, I know what is good for you. And the community actually worked very well with us, and now we have a four-pronged approach to it, very, very systematic, very intentional, very strategic. And the goal is, because I know that area will get development, because I can see private development coming there, the fear that we have is that the people might get displaced.
Yes, right.
And that's not what we want. I mean, so the challenge I gave to our faculty and staff was that we need to figure it out how to shape the development in this area or whatever is going on in future without displacing the people. Because if they got displaced, what's the role of the university? So we have 6 public schools, HISD-run public schools, that we started, 9 colleges started to go out and work. I said, just don't use any excuse that it's because of this or because of that. We have every possible discipline to really help out. If it's parent engagement, if it's language issues, if it's eyesight, we have every kind of thing. Let's just go out and see what can we do to empower. Well, this year, I know one of the HISD school, and I'm not saying it's because of us, but it's just because of the partnership we built. One HISD school got Harvey waiver, but the other 5 are no longer failing the schools there. So it's possible to move the needle. But then we are also running, from our business school, we are running a small business boot camp. And so far, 19 businesses have come out from the residents in the 3rd ward. We have envisioned an arts mile from University of Houston's Arts District all the way to the Emancipation Park with the studios and restaurants. And I think it's going to be hugely empowering to the neighborhood. So it's a project that I think it makes us better as a university, because you need a Tier 1 neighborhood, and I think it helps the neighborhood. But I think for Houston, we want to prove that diversity and excellence are not mutually exclusive.
Well, let's talk about that, because earlier today I cited what John Hickenlooper, who's now the governor of Colorado, when he was the mayor of Denver, he talked about what he called the Denver paradox. That was the phrase he used, which was the city, like Houston, was so attractive and so economically dynamic that it was attracting young people from all over the country and all over the world to compete for the jobs it was creating, but it could not put its own young people from low-income and minority neighborhoods on track to really be part of that economic growth. Both of you, I mean, the University of Houston is one of the most diverse public institutions in the country. Rice is also, I believe, a majority-minority student body, which is, and I want to ask you 2 questions about that. First, what does it take to create a pipeline of students from low-income and minority neighborhoods who are equipped to apply for and transition into your how do you work with the school system, or what is required to get kids on the track to begin, to just come in the front door?
So pipeline issue is definitely a very serious issue. And recently, we have started a project which is the largest of its kind in the nation. It's called the GPS, so the Guided Pathways to Success. And in that project, we have 11 public institutions in Houston, all in one consortium under one data set. And these include TSU, UH Downtown, University of Houston, and then it has 6 community colleges. And the idea is no matter where you enter this pipeline for your education, your post-secondary education, you should have a seamless pathway to wherever you want to go, so that you are not wasting any credit hours. You don't know where shall I go and what can I take, because it makes no sense for a 120 credit hour degree. Why should students, and particularly those who cannot afford to pay tuition, are earning 150 credit hours? So that impacts 350,000 students here in Houston. Wow. We have been called all over the country to talk about the GPS. How do you get everybody under one data? So it's all big data, it's all data analytics. It's going to change the face of that pipeline, at least from that angle. But we have, of course, many, many programs with high schools, middle schools, because that's where you have to start inspiring people. We open our campus, throughout summer to just get people to come in.
Is that just for a visit, or are there transitional programs for?
There are many, many transitional programs, because in my chancellor's hat, we have 8 locations here. 7 of those 8 locations are in Houston. and we have 75,000 students, and some of them working 30 hours, and they are as important. I mean, for me, the whole thing is, yes, we were built with the mission that the University of Houston is for working men and women. Who would say that the working men and women deserve only average? I aspire absolutely 100%, absolutely excellence education for them, globally competitive.
Let me come back to that in a minute, but presently, creating a pipeline for a private institution.
Well, I think there are different parts of it. Some of it's in the pipeline, and some of it's really in affordability and accessibility. As you noted, we are institutions in the country, certainly one of the most diverse private universities in the country. Very recently, we announced what we called the Rice Investment, which is a new financial aid policy, which is both to provide generous financial aid, but also to make it very clear and transparent, so that I think I can describe it in 30 seconds.
Sure.
You know, under $65,000 of family income, Rice will provide grants that cover tuition fees, room and board. That is really almost all expenses. Between $65,000 and $130,000, Rice will provide a grant that covers at least full tuition, and between $130,000 and $200,000, we will provide a grant that covers at least half tuition. So very few universities have financial aid policies that they can describe in 30 seconds. And that's important, because what you see is people thought there's an undermatching problem in which students from poorer backgrounds don't think they can go to a school like Rice. So that's a big part of it. And the other thing is, I think, as Renew has pointed out, it's really incumbent upon us to be involved in the schools in various ways. We do a lot of teacher training. We bring a lot of children on the campus every year just so they can see what a university looks like. We now have an effort at Rice producing free textbooks for college students, and also moving into high school and AP students. People often don't know this. A single college textbook can cost $400. This is not just a benefit for Rice, but for community colleges, not just in Houston, Texas, around the country.
So let me ask both of you, and I'll stick with you, President, right to start. Getting students of color and low-income families into higher education is one thing. Getting them out is another. But I was struck in looking at the data on both of your institutions that your 6-year completion rates are actually quite similar for white, Latino, and African-American students, which is not the case nationally. So I'm interested in what each of you have learned about improving those completion rates and avoiding the circumstance where, low-income kids start, accumulate costs, and never finish. How have you converged these completion rates across racial lines?
I think the reference before to some kind of bridge program, you have to remember these are very talented students we take in. They're all very highly qualified, but they didn't all have the same advantages. They may have gone to high schools without a lot of AP programs, for example, not have the same opportunities for teacher engagement. So we bring a number of these students in early over the summer and give them a chance to really understand what the Rice environment would look like. And we have an advantage. We're relatively small in size, and that gives us the opportunity for really retail attention to every student and a focus on every student. But it's really not, in our view, just about the academics. What students really need to do, they need to feel a part of the community. They need to feel welcome in that community. They need to feel not just sort of welcome in the classrooms, but every kind of activity that goes on across the community. And I think if you achieve that sense of welcome, you're really going to advance your graduations a lot.
I think that's a very, very good question. We learned it hard way because we don't charge any tuition. I mean, it's a free education, no tuition, no fee for any student whose family income is $50,000. And you can imagine for us, the kind of students we get, that's a nice size number. What we learned is that those students, their graduation rate really wasn't any better than it was for the rest of the group. So which meant that we actually had to focus on other things, and we had to dissect the learning habits and the environment and experience for different groups. And so the advisors, they had to take the responsibility of not just sitting and advising, but what happened to your cohort, and whether they came back or what's their GPAs. The minute you change the accountability system, you see, how things start to change. So we have many, many programs. One of those are programs which, people may not realize. I mean, We take pride in the fact that we can provide opportunity for students to commute, stay at home, work, and they still come. And still, we have 8,000 students who are residential students. We built a program called UH in 4. And in that program, for 4 years, your tuition is fixed. You get guaranteed seat. You have advisor. You have intrusive system that won't let you take a wrong class because you will get pinged on your mobile phone to say you are in a wrong class. This is not going to count. We did all of that. We thought maybe few students will take it. Now, 2/3 of the class is in that UH in 4 class. They are not graduating in 6 years. They are graduating in 4 years.
The experience is if you can get people out faster, you're more right. The longer it goes, often the more attrition you face.
Absolutely, it is very true. But for us, it's also a motivation for also, giving them the sense of belonging, because for us as a public university in a metropolitan area, it's really about two things. It's about scaling, because we can't have a boutique type of program. We have to scale it. And the secondly is a public mission. We cannot and never, ever forget what that public mission is. So we keep very good tab on what is it, what's our sticker price, what's our actual cost. We gave out $364 million in financial aid. But that's not enough. There's all kinds of other things.
I'm going to bring in the audience in one moment for questions, but I want to ask you, Steve Murdoch, who has been at Rice, former Census Bureau head for George W. Bush, has written very eloquently about the intertwined generational and racial change that Texas is living through. And the question of, now we are at a point where a clear majority of the under 30 and certainly the under 18 population are kids of color. And yet the over 50, especially the over 60 population is still predominantly white. It is the condition for the country overall. And he raises the question of whether this older generation sees a stake in equipping this younger, more diverse generation with the skills they need to reach the middle class. Certainly we have seen in many states a decline in public support, in taxpayer support for public higher education, a shift of responsibility to families. Do you feel, as you interact with leaders in the state, that there is, in fact, a commitment to doing what it takes to help more of these kids from lower-income minority communities reach the middle class?
So I certainly have seen that commitment. And I want to say one of the most important things we do, which is reflected in those remarks, is we do research about this. We have, for example, at Rice, the Kinder Institute for Urban Research, what Steve Murdoch does. So both of our universities generate a huge amount of information and understanding through data that, particularly in areas like this, no other institution is doing in our society. But what I really want to say is I've lived in a lot of different cities across the country. I've never seen a city like Houston in terms of the philanthropic commitment in the city, in terms of what people care about in the city, in terms of advancing the least well-off people in the city, and in terms of solving the really fundamental problem the city does face, which is the education of our poorer and underrepresented minority communities.
Oh, it's most definitely true. In Houston, ditto. Everything David has said is very true. I mean, it's a very special city, a very special community. Otherwise, we wouldn't be where we are. And I mean, I probably wouldn't be where I am because their support from the city is extremely important. However, in the state also, we are a public university. I'm in Austin, all the time. And there is a genuine commitment to how do you take the demographics that we see in the state. Immigration is not going to solve the problem. You can keep on bringing people in, but that's not good. We have to educate our own people, and we have to educate them not for the average, but to be the global leaders. And I see that. Now, of course, you can say, well, there's not much a state commitment, in terms of funding for higher education. That speaks differently. But I'll tell you, I'm blessed to be in Texas because I know what's happening in many other states, In Texas is still, our governor is committed, our delegation is committed. I mean, there are certain realities, and we have to do our job in making sure that we are running our operation as good as possible.
Leanly as,
Yeah, and which we have been doing. I mean, the collaboration. I mean, the two of us, we have over 280 collaborative projects together. Our students can take 6 credit hours in each other institution. I mean, it's better to have 2 horsepowers than the 1, right? I mean, it's simple enough. And
Hey,
that's what
don't
we
forget
do here.
the red tie I wore for you.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's true.
Let's see if we got any questions. Do we have any questions in the audience? There's a couple in the middle. If we can't really see up here, so we're like totally dependent on our mic runners. And there it goes.
Bob Ford. I'm a retired Texas Southern University professor and administrator. I love Chancellor Couture's reference to Tier 1 community. Could you describe that, and how does it intersect with the mayor's notion of complete community, of which Third Ward is one?
First, I'll take credit for mayor because he's our graduate. So first of all. Okay, our goal and vision fits exactly in that complete communities thing. I mean, there is no reason why people who are there and who may have had whatever circumstances, whatever their background, and that's what I say to the students too. We get so many from our neighborhood also. And I visit every single freshman class. I visit every single freshman students, and what I tell them is that don't limit your dreams. You can do it. And the bottom line is, I want them to feel special when they walk on the University of Houston campus, regardless of wherever they have come from. And that's why we've transformed the institution as well, because I want them to leave from the university thinking they can do anything. So yes, keeping the community in that neighborhood and is still having for them opportunities, the economic opportunities, the educational opportunities, health opportunities. I mean, we're bringing a medical school on board. It's going to be a clinic will be right there in the community. We shouldn't be sitting just 3 miles from the Texas Medical Center, and that community constantly keeps telling me, we don't have any clinic here, we don't have any hospital here, we don't have healthcare access here. I mean, you got to build everybody together.
One more, if we have a question. Mic is moving.
Hi there, you can stand. Hi, I'm Hamida. I work at Amana Refugee Services, and it was actually founded by a group of students on campus at U of H in around 2008. And I actually wanted to tell you a little bit about my friend Yasmin. She's a Syrian refugee. She goes to Sharpstown High School because that's where that's the area she was resettled in due to limited government funding. She's very, very intelligent, and she's actually graduating a year early. So I think that she can actually be one of the global leaders that you're describing. So I want her to be on the college track. I've been encouraging her to apply, but when I first asked her, she didn't know what a GPA was. And I found that to be problematic because I really, really believe that she can be successful and go to college, but for some reason that's not a priority in her high school. Maybe because it's lower income. I'm not really sure exactly what the reasons are. I just see it as a potentially lost opportunity. Yeah. So do you have any transitional programming for people that have those language and cultural barriers, but that do have that promise that, Wes Moore kind of talked about?
Definitely. We do have English language program, but in what happens in high school, we have to take responsibility for that too. We can't simply say, well, they're not coming prepared to us, because whose teachers are teaching there? They're our teachers too, right? So we are the ones who have trained them. There's another very good project that's going on, and that's Good Reason Houston, and I think some of those things are trying to just close those gaps where people think it's not for them or it's not available to them. And we have several things. We take things to high schools, to middle schools, we bring them on board. But it's such a big place, things fall through the cracks. We have to do much, much better job of making sure people know. Just creating pipelines isn't going to help.
You talked about undermatching before.
Yeah, and a huge problem is the public schools are hugely under-resourced in terms of college counseling. And one of the things we do is we send both faculty and students out into the schools. The students themselves, that is our students, are a huge resource in going into the schools, programs like Teach for America as well, but we really need to get both the information and the aspiration into the schools, and when we do that, I think we see much more success. And so please contact us, either of us, and we'll sort of look for the way to develop a contact with the school to really raise that level of aspiration.
President, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, please welcome Nicholas Canelos, Professor of Hispanic Studies at the University of Houston. Back to lead the discussion, Kathleen Koch.
Welcome, Nick. And as you may notice, according to your program, we were supposed to be joined by Rick Lowe, artist and founder of Project Row Houses, and unfortunately, he was unable to attend. But fortunately, Nick, that means we have a lot more time to talk.
That's great.
So I think your personal history is just fascinating. You're a prolific author. You're founder of the oldest Hispanic publishing house in the United States. And really, you have taken on this personal mission of preserving Hispanic literature and culture in the United States. Talk to me how all this started for you.
Well, if we think about the importance of art in the community, our effort came out of the civil rights movement in the 1960s and 1970s. Now, I don't want the young people's eyes to glaze over when we talk about the 60s and 70s, but actually, art was at the service of defining community and helping the community to move forward and find its identity. And that's what happened in the 1960s and 70s in the Latino civil rights movement. And we started publishing magazines and doing street theater, and there were mural artists and everything. It was a flourishing of the arts. And that very much moved us forward, pushed us into publishing books. So by the late 1970s, we founded Arte Público Press, and we called it Arte Público, public art, because we wanted to derive the culture from the community and return it to the community. We wanted to be reflective and serve the needs of that community.
Now, give us an idea how walled off the publishing world was then and to a certain extent still is to Latinos.
Well, my generation never found ourselves in books that we read in school or on the shelves of the library. Even though there was a very rich historical culture of writing, publishing, of art, etc., but it just was not accessible. So part of our mission is going back and finding all of that and making it accessible. But
where do you find it?
Well, you find it in old archives, you find it in old newspapers. There were something like 2,000 Spanish language newspapers published in the United States from the 19th to the 1960s. People didn't know about them, didn't have access, and that was the primary place where art and literature was published.
Where your stories were told and preserved, right?
Yeah, so we started Arte Público Press not only to publish contemporary voices that came out of the community, emerged from the community, when the publishing world was very much closed off to us. It still is kind of closed off to us. There are some headliners, many of whom actually we launched.
Okay.
Through
Such as who? Name some names.
Oh, Sandra Cisneros,
okay.
Gary Soto, Victor Villaseñor, bestsellers. You know, they always get the headlines, but we have lots of other people that come up from the grassroots, even develop out of creative writing programs at universities that still confront the barriers in publishing, getting into New York or getting into the movies or getting into television.
How frustrating is that in our country today, which, as we look a few decades down the road, we are going to become a majority country of color, people of color?
Well, it's really critical when a large portion of the population is not reflected in the media. Mm-hmm. And for us, the primary media, the mother of the media is the printed word. And it is so flexible, it goes on the computer, it goes on to all types of screens. And we're very much interested in going beyond what's on the page to all the different forms where people get information or art and culture. And one of the places that we find that is especially critical to us is children's books. Less than 5% of children's books published in the United States are written by minorities. And half of those are written from people outside of the culture. It's a truly dangerous situation when we're talking about literacy. We do work with the Barbara Bush Literacy Foundation and many others. But it's critical when kids go preschool, kindergarten, third grade, and they never get to see themselves in the pages of books. They can't identify with those books. If there's something that looks like their home, their family, the language that is spoken, if the books can be bridges from home to the school, it is so important to start that literacy journey through things that are recognizable.
Exactly. You know? That ignites the passion to read if there's something in there that excites you. I mean, as Neil Bush was just saying, that's how you get children into reading.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we publish for all different audiences and all different ages, but we have a great emphasis in our children's book line, which is called Piñata Books, that we develop the books with professional authors and illustrators around the issues that are important to kids and their culture, things about bilingualism, things about immigration, things about family separations.
These are real issues.
Really, but you know, they're not thrown in the face of kids. They're just touchstones where people know their environment. They can see what is going on, and they get knowledge about that. So they feel at home. The characters in the books look like their families, like their neighborhood, so on and so forth. And it's so important. Part of that is we also have a dynamic program of touring national writers to the schools, community centers.
And that's what we see the image of right there. Is that a writer reading to children?
Absolutely, yes. So we bring them into Houston, and the kids love it. But more important about that is that we just don't read to kids, which reading is very important, and we teach parents how to read to kids. But we also work with kids so that they can develop their writing and reading skills, and they can control what is in their own little creative books. They can get the idea that they can write.
That's so exciting.
They can create books. They can do what these authors are doing and see, you know, the finished product of the authors. One day they may be able to do it. But behind that is our hope that they go and understand that they're manipulating their environment, that they can take elements and fashion them into art, history, literature, and this will be an important stepping stone in their whole education.
And you're also using books to help children improve their health. Talk to me about that. Work on exercise, diabetes, things like that.
Well, unfortunately, among Hispanic families, diabetes is rampant. And so we wanted to help to nip that in the bud. And so we created a program called Salud Familia, where we engage some of the leading nutritionists and dietitians and health experts from around the country to vet the writing of some of our professional writers on specific how to eat, you know, how to plan the kinds of things to eat and the kinds of exercise to do in very, very entertaining books for kids that we were able to give out through community centers and community health centers. Hundreds of thousands of these books we gave out around the country and in Houston, of course.
There was a study done recently, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It came out last year, and they looked at the impact of communities, and this was in New York City, where lower and middle income communities, where people had more ready access to cultural resources, and they found that the communities, the residents there, had better outcomes when it came to education, security, and health. I mean, we've always felt like the arts will improve a community, but this seems like some solid proof.
Oh, we firmly believe in that. And when art comes out of the community and is integrated in the community and celebrated and actually reflects, helps the community understand the vectors of power and economics that they deal with on a daily basis, they can understand better how to move, how to create, how to identify, how to make change in their own communities.
You know, before we go to the audience for questions, I did want to ask you, then does that make it even more frustrating that, for instance, here in the Houston area, where you have a Hispanic population of more than 40%, when it comes to funding from foundations, from the state or the federal government for the arts, less than 1% of that goes to Latino organizations, artists, writers?
Oh, tell me about it.
How do you address that?
It's absolutely true. I use the word sequestered, that the foundations, the government, and corporate funding, the giant share of it goes into providing entertainment for the executive class at some of our largest institutions while starving the grassroots and starving the ethnic and cultural arts groups that are in the community. Less than 1%, that's dastardly, you know. So what some of the arts organizations in the community are doing are they're getting together. Recently, here in Houston, the Latino artists founded a group called HALA, the Houston Association of Latino Arts. It rhymes with pull in Spanish, jalar, you know. And we're also going to have a 3-month celebration of Latino arts here in Houston called Latino Art Now. And we've already signed on about 33 institutions across the community to have exhibitions and events. And these 33 organizations, as of now, will launch 43 events in the community beginning in February 2019.
How exciting. Well, you'll definitely be getting attention from all of those, and hopefully funding will be forthcoming. Well, let's go to our audience, see if folks have some questions here. We have one in the back. And if you would just identify yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Ed Nowatka. I'm an editor at Publishers Weekly, which is a trade magazine about books. I'm curious, Houston strikes me as a city that's very misunderstood nationally. And in the way that your press, Arte Publico, has been instrumental in helping Latino and Hispanic culture tell its own story, what can be done for Houston to tell its story better to the nation? We have very little publishing in this city, and I'm curious how that could be fostered. Thank you.
Great question.
Well, actually, I'm trying to, currently working with various literary groups to bring the various sectors of the literary community together and develop workshops, such as summer workshops for writers in the area and as well as out of the area, to coalesce and begin creating other alternatives for publishing and for writing here in Houston, and possibly this will have some kind of impact on the national scene. But yeah, like in many areas of Houston, we have food deserts. We have a publishing desert here in Houston. We do not like to be the only and biggest operation in town as far as publishing is concerned. We would like a more broader community of writing and publishing. But we do have many, many writers, but the access to publishing is very diminished.
Okay. More questions? Here we go, right here in the front. Young lady.
Hi, my name is Melissa Mayorga, and I just recently saw the Netflix show by John Leguizamo about the Latin cultures and how it is portrayed here in the United States, and the lack of Latino leadership and heroes that is demonstrated in our school system. How is it that, or how would you see it changing in the near future for our children to learn a little bit about, you know, where we came from and how many heroes actually paved the land, not just here in the United States, but throughout the world?
Thank you.
We have recently, I would say recently over the last 5 or 6 years, fought large battles in states, especially in the Southwest, to get our history into the schools. And we face a lot of barriers in doing that, but Arte Publico, Nuestra Palabra in our community, and various other organizations are fighting that. And we work on a daily basis to get all of this information that is relevant to the United States as part of American history and American culture, not a foreign history, not a foreign culture. We've always been here since before the Founding Fathers, and this history needs to be part of what forms the community and creates the community identity. What became the U.S. has always been diverse and always drawn from many different cultures. It's just that quite often the people who write the books, the textbooks, or get them published, forgot about us.
All right, we have time for actually maybe one more question. Yeah? All right, one in the back there.
Hi, this is Margaret Adams. I wanted to ask you, since we have a dearth of publishing companies that focus on Latino stories, how can we as the community help support get those stories out in alternative methods? Are we looking at alternative newspapers? Are we looking at like open mic nights and community conversations at colleges? What does that look like to you?
Really great question. What can we do?
I think all of the above, of course. There's more and more space for online publishing and for online discussion and chat rooms and blogs. And this quite often begins to create a community that eventually can move into the other media. And one of our authors who became the poet laureate of Houston, Gwendolyn Cepeda, started off as an online blogger with her literary comments and her stories and poems, etc. And eventually, not only did she publish with Arte Público, she published with publishing houses in New York that have national, international reach. So yeah, there are building blocks and things that we can do.
Right. Thank you all for your questions, and join me in thanking Nicholas Canelos. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
So much, Nicholas Canelos. Thank you, Kathleen Koch, Ron Brownstein, for leading today's conversation. I want to just remark on what a rich, wide-ranging, and thoughtful morning this was. We began with Wes Moore expressing the larger hope that this country has a place for everyone. We heard about the importance of education, innovation, transportation, collaboration, aspiration, art, and of history. And from Neil Bush, we understood just how critical it is to be able to read, and we also learned that he was indeed his mother's favorite son. It was a really good way to start the day with all of you. I also want to thank all of our other speakers and give another big, loud shout out to Allstate. Thank you for making this morning possible. Thank you for making our renewal series possible. Thank you for everything. And I want to thank you. You have been a magnificent audience. I know how vital and precious your time is. Thank you so much for giving so much of it to us. And I'm happy to report that there's no need to rush out. If your schedule allows, we'd love you to stay with us for lunch. There's lots of delicious food outside. You can continue the conversation with one another and connect with old friends and new. Thank you all again.